Nama saya Mukhruddin Hashimov dari Uzbekistan. Sebelum datang ke Indonesia, sama sekali tidak tahu budaya Indonesia. Hanya saya tahu letaknya di Bita dan banyak pulau-pulaunya.
Nama saya Huang Zhaoying dari China. Tapi orang-orang di sini lebih suka memanggil saya Cherry karena nama itu lebih dilafalkan dan teringat. Pertama kali saya datang ke Solo, Indonesia, saya perlengkapan kota ini kecil tapi menyenangkan.
Nama saya Jean-Jacques, bisa dipanggil JJ. Saya dari Madagaskar. Sejak datang ke Solo, saya masuk ke masyarakat dan menjadi bagian masyarakat setempat. Berbaur dalam kehidupan sehari-hari, termasuk budaya, bahasa, dan makanan.
Pertama kali datang ke Solo, hal baru yang ketemui, ada banyak orang makan di jalan. Aku sangat terkejut. Ini sangat berbeda dengan Uzbekistan. Di Uzbekistan semua orang-orang makan di rumah atau di restoran, tidak ada warung yang terbuka.
Karena saya adalah orang yang sangat suka mencoba makanan baru dan memasak. Hal pertama yang saya lakukan ketika berada di tempat baru adalah mengunjungi pasar tradisionalnya. Di pasar gede, saya merasa terkejut dengan bentuk pasar itu yang begitu tradisional. Akan tetapi, hal yang membuat saya takjub adalah bagian tengah dari pasar gede yang merupakan tempat sempit seperti aliran sungai kecil di hutan.
Saat pertama, saya kesulitan dengan makanan yang selalu manis dan pedas. Karena di Madagaskar, semua makanan rasanya asin.
Di sini apapun makannya, minumnya adalah es teh.
Mas, saya mau pesan apa? Es teh.
Es teh.
Es teh. Es teh.
Es teh, Pak.
Es teh. Ya.
Ya, makasih.
Di dalam pasar gede itu seperti surgaya belanja. Anda bisa menemukan makanan tradisional yang lezat di sini. Makanan-makanan yang berwarna-warni dan belum saya ketahui membuat saya penasaran untuk mencoba.
Di Solo, saya selalu makan di warung. Saya terkejut dengan makanan di warung. Semuanya pedas. Meskipun aku sudah bilang ke ibu warung, "Bu, jangan pedas ya." Ibu, ingat jangan pedas ya. Ibu, sudah saya bilang jangan pedas. Setelah 1 bulan, akhirnya saya bisa menikmati makanan gado-gado. Dan sekarang, tidak bisa makan kalau tidak ada rasa pedasnya.
Selain orang-orang makan di jalan, di Solo, orang-orang juga makan di lantai. Terima kasih ya. Ternyata duduk-duduk di lantai membuat makan lebih enak.
Yang saya suka di pasar gede, beberapa petakannya bisa bicara bahasa Mandarin. Ayi, 这个呢？4500，总共多少钱？Saya merasa bahagia dan seperti di rumah sendiri ketika menemukan produk dari China di pasar gede, seperti kecap asam. Kebanyakan kecap lokal berasa manis. Anda tidak akan pernah tahu bagaimana mereka memilih telur yang masih layak atau tidak, hanya dengan menggunakan corong peluru. Semua ini luar biasa dan lucu.
Sekarang aku menikmati hidup di Solo. Perbedaan cara makan bukan lagi menjadi masalah. Aku sangat menghargai budaya makan di Solo dan bisa ikut menikmatinya.
Di pasar gede yang bisa Anda lakukan tidak hanya membeli kebutuhan sehari-hari, tapi juga mengetahui kehidupan di Solo dan sikap mereka terhadap kehidupan.
Solo adalah kota favorit saya di Indonesia. Makan di sini sangat murah. Saya mengundang kamu untuk datang ke sini dan merasakan makanan Solo. Saya jamin 100% kamu akan makan banyak.
It's time to bring education into the fourth industrial revolution. Flexible, tailor-made curricula are taught by teachers who become mentors to their students, giving the workforce of tomorrow the tools to become active lifelong learners, independent problem solvers, and create a diverse and pluralistic society where every person understands and plays to their strengths, building a fair and self-sustaining model for education rather than knowledge. Universitas Sibeles Moret is here to align Education 4.0 with Industry 4.0. Universitas Sibeles Moret was established on March 11, 1976. As one of the most outstanding universities in Indonesia, Universitas Sibeles Moret has noble ideals to develop the country.
Universitas Sibeles Moret is located in the suburban area of Surakarta, colloquially known as Solo, a city in central Java, Indonesia. The city is located within a 50-minute flight from Jakarta and 1-hour flight from Bali. Solo is well known as a city of culture and the capital of batik.
Universitas Sibeles Moret Surakarta has grown rapidly over the years. It has positioned itself to become the leading institution in Indonesia. Universitas Sibeles Moret strives to provide high-quality education, develop scientific knowledge and technology products at an international level. With its adequate and appropriate learning infrastructure, Universitas Sibeles Moret offers a unique and engaging learning environment and provides integrated IT facilities and information system in a convenient academic atmosphere and green campus area.
The library features thousands of books and provides access to a wide variety of international journals, which is expected to enhance the learning of the students, faculty, and researchers.
In addition to the fundamental concepts and skills required for a successful career, a graduate of the Universitas Sibeles Moret is armed with soft skills by taking part in various student activities on campus and student organizations both at national and international level.
Students also have the opportunity to acquire global experience through student exchange programs, global internship programs, multilateral research projects, and other international collaborative activities. Universitas Sibeles Moret encourages all researchers to promote their work through publication in national and international journals, as well as other forms of dissemination, such as presentation at national and international scientific forums. Researchers have produced excellent research products and become engaged in the activities of the community through various community service programs.
Effective partnership and strong collaborations have become inseparable parts of Universitas Sebelas Maret, without which progress in education, research, and community service wouldn't have been achieved. Our international partnerships create ample opportunities for student and staff exchange, research collaboration, and community service. International collaboration helps to give a global perspective on learning in order to address global challenges while still functioning in a national environment based on potential and local wisdom.
Universitas Sebelas Maret has three main agendas toward a world-class university. Acceleration in various fields of development is needed by embracing the foundation of UNS, Benteng Pancasila. Therefore, 5 strategic policy pillars were decided.
We gladly welcome you to explore and experience our program and to enjoy our campus life, which depicts a blend of cultural power, professional life, and technological advance. Universitas Sebelas Maret, toward a world-class university.
Hari dengan langkah pasti, bersiap menyambut dunia, raih cita-cita. Walaupun banyak hal yang tak pasti, usia tak jadi penghalang untuk raih prestasi.
Salah hidup ini
nusa dan bangsa. Generasi berbudaya, semangat yang membara, tak pernah berhenti berkarya. Walau kegagalan menghadang, ku tahu kita bisa menjadi kebanggaan. Selamat bertambah usia, UNS tercinta, kebanggaan nusa dan bangsa. Generasi berbudaya, semangat yang membara, tak pernah berhenti berkarya. Walau kegagalan menghadang, ku tahu kita bisa menjadi kebanggaan untuk negara. Menjadi kebanggaan untuk negara.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning, Professor Gary Berghuizen from University of Auckland, New Zealand. It is an honor to welcome you back for day 3. All the lecturers of English Education Master Program, the Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Universitas 11 Maret, Surakarta. And a good morning, a special greetings to all participants, ladies and gentlemen from Indonesia, Australia, Thailand, Nepal, and UK. As the Master of Ceremony, I'm delighted to welcome you back to the Day 3 of Narrative Inquiry webinar, Teacher Stories, Research, and Reflection 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard a lot about narrative inquiry from Professor Gary Berghuizen during the webinar in these last 2 days. And today would be the last day for discussing about narrative inquiry with Professor Gary. Of course, it would be really impactful to apply and practice directly what Professor Gary has delivered and what we have discussed before. And we are lucky because I would like to remind you that we have book chapter call for paper. So the Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Universitas 11 Maret, is calling for all the participants here to participate in writing a paper for book chapter with the topic of narrative inquiry for teacher education, learning from the past stories for today and the future. With 1,000 until 1,250 words long, you could share your experiences and ideas in doing research, thesis, and dissertation with the related topic. And the paper would be edited by Dr. Nur Arifah Drajati from Universitas 11 Maret and would be published by UNS Press. So if you're interested, please note the important date on 17th of May 2022 for submitting the abstract, 17th of June 2022 for submitting the full paper, and 17th of August 2022 for the possible publication. So I would like to highlight once more that the nearest agenda is for submitting the abstract on 17th May 2022. If you still want to go further, the information about the requirement and the paper submission, you can send it to the email provided, nibookchapter@gmail.com. Once again, nibookchapter@gmail.com. We look forward to seeing your participation in the book chapter. Well, that's it about the next agenda, which is the calling for paper of book chapter as the part of the agenda series of this webinar. Well, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, proceed to the following agenda is the last session delivered by Professor Gary Berguizen, and the session would be moderated by Dr. Nur Arifah Drajati. The Dr. Nur Arifah, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Mutia, for opening this morning sessions. And good morning for Prof. Gary Berguizen and also Professor all the participants, both students and lecturers all around Indonesia and other countries. Okay, today this is the third day. Hopefully that we are. It is so interesting to learn about narrative inquiry, and we have the topic today is narrative inquiry as the teacher's reflection and identity. So today is the final day, but hopefully this is not the final time or the end of the time for learning narrative inquiry. But before we learn from Professor Gary Berguizen about this topic, we still have a lot of questions yesterday that need to listen from Professor Gary Berguizen about the questions and also his response. Good morning, Professor Gary.
Good morning and good afternoon from New Zealand. It's very nice to be back again.
Yeah, thank you. This is the third day that we meet for this event. So we have some questions regarding yesterday topic, Professor Gary Berguizen, that I'm trying to listen, to write the questions.
Sorry, I wonder if I shouldn't perhaps just give a 5-minute recap of narrative frames,
okay,
and then we'll get to the questions.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
Is that okay? I'll really just keep to five minutes just to remind everyone of some of those main points about narrative frames, and then we can open up for questions within 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Let me just share my screen quickly. I did prepare some slides. I didn't prepare any new ones, but these were the ones that I showed you yesterday. Just in terms of narrative frames, this is the one I showed you that I used in that example with the study in China, where I looked at the college English teachers' ideas about research and their engagement in research. And just a reminder that the narrative frame, as you can see here, has a sentence starter and then some space for writing a response to the sentence starter. And very important is that the sentence starters are designed so that it forms a story when they are all completed. So you end up with a story once it's filled in. I then told you about another study with immigrants and refugees here in New Zealand. And with this narrative frame, I had learned from my previous experience where the problem had been the respondents didn't have enough space. And so I gave them some space at the beginning here where they could write freely about their experiences of learning English in New Zealand. And the focus was on the problems and the successes of learning English. And the narrative frame was designed in 3 stages: learning English in the past, the problems and successes, and then the problems and successes now in their present lives, and then also in the future, their ideas about successes in the future. So the frame was very similar in terms of having sentence starters and then space for completing the sentences to form a story, right? And so the narrative frame is designed to form a story. And I very much rushed through these at the end, but some of the strengths of the frame is that they allow the writers to write narratively by scaffolding them. So you help them to write a narrative by the way that you as a researcher have designed the narrative frame. You've designed it as a story. The design also means that the frame obtains the information that they want in order to achieve the aims of the study. So there's still some flexibility in what the respondents can write because they complete the sentences according to their own experience. So there's some flexibility, but the design is still very restrictive in terms of the research question. The way the narrative frame is structured, in terms of its space, with the way you've set it out, allows the writers to tell their experiences, but not long, detailed stories, just a snapshot, just a quick reflection about the particular topic, which together with stories of many other participants allows a lot of information about that topic. The structured nature of the frame makes for easier analysis. And I showed you how by using a spreadsheet, you can put the stories in the rows, and then the themes are already categorized for you in the column. So the analysis is much easier to do because all the sentence starters are in the same, the responses to the sentence starters are in the same column. So it helps, it facilitates the data analysis. And the frames also limit the quantity of data because often with narrative research, you end up with lots and lots of data. So it limits the quantity, and therefore you can have many more participants. Another strength is that the frames serve an exploratory purpose. So it enables you to explore a new context for the first time. Obviously, if you are familiar with the context, you want to ask much more in-depth questions. But if you are unfamiliar with the context, the frame is quite useful because it can just help you to become, familiar just to a limited extent, all right? It may be an unfamiliar region and so on. In terms of the limitations, I'll just mention 6 quickly and then we'll stop. So the limitations are the respondents may need or may desire more space to write. Now, it's very limiting in terms of the space that's given. You're only given a little bit of space. And so you can see there that there is a limitation, and that's a limitation of frames. The content structure of the frame, the way you've designed the story, may not be suitable to all respondents. They may have different ideas about the way a story should be structured. The researchers may feel that at times they would like more content than that which is captured in the frames, in the spaces. You'll say, oh, that is an interesting idea, but then there's no space. They've finished writing. So there's that limitation. You want more. Therefore, it's probably a good idea to follow up some of these with interviews where you can say, oh, this is an interesting frame. Now, can you tell me more about this response? Can you tell me more about this response? And so it's good to follow up the frame with other types of data collection. And there's limited opportunity for respondents to write about other topics that are not there in the frame. So they're very much, stuck to what they have to respond to in the frames. They may respond in wrong ways to what the sentence starter is requesting. So they may misinterpret what the sentence starter is asking. So you've got to be very careful how you word the sentence starters to make sure you get the information that you are looking for. The potential exists for respondents to write a list of unconnected ideas. So you've got to make sure that when you give the instructions that the respondents know they must write a story so that the responses need to relate to the responses that have come before. So they all need to be connected. Each sentence starter relates to the other one. So they write a story. They don't write separate sentences or disconnected sentences. Very important. And then the last one is that the narrative frames, this is the major limitation, is that it reduces the respondents to just a respondent rather than a person with a story, right? Because especially if you've got many respondents. Like I had 83 in the one study and 40 something in the other. So you tend to depersonalize the teachers or the learners or whoever the respondents are, especially when you start, counting the responses and reducing them to numbers and doing frequency count. So that, it's sort of anti-narrative, as I said yesterday, I think. It's not really looking at their full lived experiences, right? I just thought I better give you these two key references. I'll just take a quick pick of these if you want to. The first one was when I introduced narrative frames with my colleague, Rosemary Vetter. This was in System in 2008. And then many people started using narrative frames. In fact, if you did a Google search, you'll see many articles published using narrative frames. But some people started using them in the incorrect way, I thought. So I wrote a follow-up article in 2014, Revisiting Narrative Frames, where I corrected some of the misuse of narrative frames. And there's the reference in 2014, Revisiting Narrative Frames, in the same journal. This article has been cited quite a lot, so people are following up with the correct use of narrative frames. And then I mentioned this study yesterday as well, which is a very recent one, just to give you an example of ways in which narrative frames have been adapted. And in this study, using photographs together with narrative frames. So actual photographs of the respondents' real lives, together with what they are writing in narrative frames. Okay, so that was just a very quick reminder about what I said yesterday. So let's get on to the discussion. Any questions about narrative frames?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Gary, for giving reminder about the topic yesterday. And it means a lot for us, for the novice researchers, and also for the students in doing the research. Yeah, okay. So this is the first questions from Lulu Laila Amalia from Bandung, Universitas, from UPI. Yeah, there are two questions. From your experience, how long does it take to conduct research using NI research methodology? And the second one, in conducting NI, can we choose interview as the sole data source? Or do we need other data source, such as classroom observation or others sources? Yeah.
Okay, so let me answer the second one first. It's interesting that most narrative inquiry studies tend to use interviews of some kind. Why is that? Because when we tell stories, we often tell stories in interaction with each other. So storytelling takes place between people. And so it seems an obvious thing to do that when we tell stories, we're going to tell stories in the process of interviewing. But the type of interviewing is a little bit different, right? Often the interviews are question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. With narrative interviewing, we tend to invite stories. So we tend to do more of things like, tell me about something. Tell me about when this happened. Tell me about your experiences. So we use more tell me about, which invites people to tell me about their experiences. Of course, we do also ask questions, particularly follow-up questions. So yes, interviews are very popular. And again, it depends on what type of narrative research you are doing. Some linguists and sociolinguists who do narrative inquiry are interested in conversation and conversation analysis. So they would record naturally occurring conversations. They may listen to a group of teachers talking, for example, or a group of students talking, and then they do conversation analysis. So it depends also on the type of study you're doing. So if you are doing like a dissertation or a thesis, usually it's a slightly bigger study. So interviews would be part of the data collection. You may do some observation of teaching and then follow it up with interviews. Or you may do some narrative frames with a larger group of participants and then interview only some of them to gain more in-depth information about their narrative frames. The observations and interviews, narrative frames, and now looking at the collection of multimodal or digital information is also becoming popular. So it's possible to look at web pages, look at things like Facebook and Twitter, you know, these different digital platforms. And you see many stories told there in digital form. So these different types of combination the different types of data can be combined in various combinations. But you've got to ask yourself, what is the purpose of my study? What am I trying to achieve? Where am I going to get the best data? And what am I going to do with that data, right? So this comes down to the data you need to collect, how much data you need, and how you're going to analyze it. And then this relates to the first question, how long does narrative inquiry take? So again, it depends on your research question. So, you know, you may want to look at the experiences of a teacher during the implementation of a new language policy. So you can't do that in a week because you need more time. You need to see how the policy is implemented. That will take some time, maybe 6 months, maybe a year even, to see how that policy is implemented, all right? But when I did my PhD many years ago, I was interested in how a first-year English teacher, a beginning English teacher, experienced her first few weeks teaching English in a high school. I wanted that intense period of her settlement into teaching. And so I only looked at 6 weeks. So I did classroom observations for 6 weeks, and I did interviews with her after every lesson, and I did interviews before and after the study, but that was very intensive. And there were classroom observations, interviews for an intensive period of time. Many of my students, my PhD students, may collect data for 3 months or 6 months or even a whole year, depending on what the aim of the study is. So there's no simple answer. I mean, you could also, if you were interested in doing more discourse analysis, you could do one interview that takes you 1 hour, and then you could analyze that interview. And so you could analyze it maybe in a week or two. So it could be very short if you're doing that type of narrative inquiry, if you're doing the discourse analysis of that narrative. It depends what question you're asking. And it depends how you're going to be doing the analysis. All right. So there's no formula for doing narrative inquiry. And as I keep saying, narrative inquiry is not SPSS, right? Yeah. It's not statistics. There are different ways of doing it, but it depends on what your research goals are, what your research questions are, how much time you've got as a researcher, how many resources you've got. Sometimes you may have very big ideas, but it may require 3 or 4 researchers to do it, and lots of funding and lots of time. But other time, if you're limited, if you're doing a master's or an undergraduate degree and you've got to do a research project, maybe you've only got 6 weeks or maybe only 4 weeks. So you can maybe interview 1 or 2 learners. Maybe you can observe them learning and then you interview them afterwards. You will have 2 short interviews and you can write stories about what you found. That's a lovely narrative inquiry, but it's for the purposes of an undergraduate project. Very different from if you're an academic professor and you've got 3 years to do a project with lots of funding, all right? So all these, I'm going to be talking about that later today, actually. So thank you for that good question to start off.
Okay, thank you. Then because of there are a lot of questions regarding to yesterday topic. This is another questions from Yogi Saputra Mahmud from Presiden University. I think that the question is related to the worries, the researcher worries, how narrative inquiry, we can bring it to propose a proposal for research fund. And because, maybe one of the reasons is we are still learning about narrative inquiry, and we are not familiar with this kind of research methodology. That's why UNS, Universitas 11 Maret, every year invite Professor Gary Berguizen to familiarize this narrative inquiry. But maybe from Professor Gary Berguizen, do you have any response for having this kind of questions?
Yeah. Remember on day one, I said I've got 10 tricky questions, right? This is one of the 10 tricky questions that maybe we can look at if we got time later today. This is one of those questions. You know, when people talk about struggling to legitimize narrative inquiry in their institutions, in their departments, sometimes even in their countries, you know, they say, in my country, they don't accept narrative, or in my country, they don't publish narrative inquiry. So these are legitimate claims. You know, there's still resistance to the idea of narrative inquiry as being a type of research approach that may not have legitimacy. And I understand that. I mean, and then you say, well, how can we argue against that if we want to introduce narrative inquiry into our environments, right? Well, in our field in language teaching and language learning, we've got methodology books now on narrative inquiry. We have many articles published in the top journals in the field, you know, Applied Linguistics, TESOL Quarterly, Modern Language Journal. Yeah, these are the top journals, right? And many others that we are familiar with, System, RELC Journal. These are good journals that publish narrative inquiry. Where the problem lies is often with regional journals, where there may be some resistance to narrative inquiry. So we got special issues even of these journals on narrative inquiry. We've got top name researchers who are publishing in narrative inquiry, in language teaching and learning, and in applied linguistics. So one approach, we've also got a lot of graduate students who are writing dissertations and theses using narrative inquiry as a research method. I'm constantly examining PhDs where the methodology is narrative inquiry, and I get more invitations than I can even accept to examine PhDs. I'm examining one now. I've got another 4 lined up for the rest of this year, and they're all narrative inquiries coming from the UK, from Australia, from New Zealand, and from other places. So, you know, so the thing to do is slowly but surely to speak to one's colleagues and one's students and do the work that you are doing, Arifa, by inviting people to come and talk to your colleagues and to your students about the methodology so that they can see that it is out there. I mean, in my 3 presentations so far, I've given you so many references. I've shown you the work. I've shown you the research that is out there that is published internationally. And so this slowly but surely needs to infiltrate into institutions where there may be resistance. It's not something that can happen overnight. This is a question I get all the time, but slowly but surely it can infiltrate. People will start to get the idea, but show your colleagues that this work exists. Show them that in these journals, some of the, the high profile academics who are famous around the world, we meet at conferences, they do the plenaries, they draw big audiences, are doing narrative work, right? And let the people see that. When you come across a PhD that's been published, show your colleagues, this is a PhD. You can get these online from libraries all over. Show the PhDs, show the master's dissertations. You can find these. You can get them for free. Distribute them amongst your colleagues. Maybe, put them in a library or something. So let people become more aware, just like you are doing. I mean, there's 300 people here today, and we've had 400 people who have been taking part in these webinars. So people are becoming aware. It's a slow process. But I can tell you in the last 10 years, just about every journal I open that's related to my field that I follow, there's always something about narrative there. More and more and more and more. And I think, and these scholars are coming from all over the world. It's not just, the US or the UK or Canada, or they're coming from all over the world, including Indonesia. I referenced an article yesterday from Indonesia. I don't know if anyone noticed. When I was looking at the topics, there was three scholars from Indonesia published an excellent article on language learner identity from a narrative perspective. So that's there.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that we need to make a confidence of ourselves in doing this kind of research, and always learn again and again. Yeah. And we can read and also discuss with other scholars talking about this research methodology, because we know that research methodology is not stuck. It's only just A and B, but it can be C, D, and X, Y, Z. Yeah. So this is talking about process. Yeah, about the process, and then how we can make it rational and make it logical and make it other people aware and understand about this research methodology.
Yeah.
Okay. Prof. Gary, I think the time we will continue the questions after you explain the next materials. Today, this is talking about the reflection and teacher identity. Okay, the time is yours.
Okay, just before I get on to that, I did notice a question very quickly in the chat about, can we use our own experience for a study? Maybe let me just read that. What about using our own stories, our own experience, like a sort of personal diary or our personal reflections as a study? Well, I mean, that's autobiography. I mean, that is the sort of typical autobiography study which is the starting point, I guess, for narrative, where people would write their biographies about something, usually their life experience or autobiography of being a teacher, maybe often about a whole teaching career, or language learning histories are autobiographies, and so on. But you need to ask yourself, are they interesting? Are they interesting to other people?
Yeah.
How are they making a contribution? So, there's autobiography, there's autoethnography. Read up a bit about autoethnography. So autoethnography is about one's own experience, but it's about your experience within a field. So it may be autoethnography, my experience as a TESOL practitioner, or my experience as a teacher educator. And then you got to refer to the field, theoretically strongly refer to the field. Look at what other people have done. So it's not just telling your story, because, I mean, it may be really interesting story, but not everyone finds your story interesting. And would you be able to publish it? Probably not. You could maybe do a dissertation on it, but with a dissertation, it needs to be theoretically informed. Yeah. It needs to fit into the discipline. It needs to have implications for the discipline. And so, remember I said at some point that narrative inquiry is more than just telling stories. That's a very important message. It's not just telling stories. It's relating those stories to the field, theoretically to the field, relating it to other work on the same topic in the field. So you've got to ground it strongly in the field. Otherwise, it's just telling stories, and then narrative inquiry gets a bad name. So the institution will say, oh, you're just telling stories. No, we can't do dissertations on narrative inquiry. You've got to show it's systematic, it's strong, it's rigorous. And so, yes, you can do it on your own work. I don't let my students do that, because unless the student is extremely experienced in something, in some way. But generally, I find that it's preferable for students to work, that they can bring their own, and they must bring their own, reflexively bring their own experiences into their studies, but to study groups and other people in relation to a particular topic. So that's a complicated, I mean, that's such a good question. That's why I thought, let me pick it up. Okay.
Prof. Gary, this is a very interesting, because I did it for my some students, yeah, and very interesting that me as their lecturer, we can find it's like a mirror. If we learn from our students' stories, yeah.
Yes.
Though. Based on my experience in guiding my students for undergraduate students,
yes,
guiding undergraduate students in doing narrative inquiry, it is not easy.
No, right.
It is not easy. Yeah.
But I would argue for an undergraduate project, it is probably a fantastic idea.
Yes.
For undergraduate project, it gives the opportunity to do the reflection, to do the writing, to do the analysis of what you wrote for undergraduate project. But I think if you start looking at a PhD, or you start looking to publish something in a journal, it's a different matter.
Yes, that's a different matter.
That's different. But for undergraduate project, I think it is fantastic idea, because you have to do the writing, you've got to do the reflection, you've got to do the analysis, the categorizing to write it, and you've got to write it for an audience. I think for undergraduate, narrative inquiry is such a good experience, because you've got to relate it, you've got to write it, you've got to bring in some a little bit of literature. I think it's perfect.
Yeah. So that's why narrative inquiry, we can bring it for the undergraduate students' final paper. Yeah. But still, it's not easy.
No, that's right. Oh, still, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we as the lecturer, guiding them very carefully. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
It's time for Prof. Gary for explaining the last topic. That's talking about reflection and also teacher identity. The time is yours.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about teacher researchers or people or teachers who engage in reflection. I'll just call them teacher researchers, and particularly teacher researchers who do narrative inquiry, right? So when we think about teacher researchers, we have to think about who we're talking about. So do we mean teachers in public schools, high schools, elementary schools? Do we mean teachers in higher education universities, in private language institutes, in community language schools? Or do we mean pre-service and in-service teacher education programs? Are we talking about teachers who are doing research for a qualification, which we've just been talking about now for just a minute ago, doing an undergraduate project? So just think for a minute, who are you as teacher researchers? So when we're thinking about teacher researchers, who are you? We've got to be careful here, because when we talk about teacher researchers, we don't mean the same thing for everybody, right? Teacher researchers are very different depending on who are you, on who they are, right? When we think about where teacher researchers are, whether you're in high school, university, in a teacher education program, where are you as a teacher researcher? You know, in rural and urban settings, the schools are very different in these two types of settings. I've just put that as an example. In well-resourced or in difficult circumstances. So are you in institutions where there are resources available? Or are you trying to do research in difficult circumstances where there are limited facilities, limited equipment, limited funding? Or you want to try and do research in a school or institution where there are large numbers, too many students, or too few students, or no one wants to be cooperative. So, and also, are the researchers supported or are they not supported? So, we often say that teachers should do research or they should do reflective practice, but do they get supported? Do they get some training for research or training for how to do reflection? And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they're not given time off to do research. Many schools, you say, you're here to teach, you're not here to do research, right? So, but in some context, there is some support for doing research. So, where are you as a teacher researcher? Are you in a supported context? Are you in a context where there are resources available, for example? So just think for 1 second, where are you? And then what type of research are you wanting to do, or are you already doing? Narrative inquiry has been our focus. A nice way with narrative inquiry is to embed it into your teaching in a sort of exploratory action research way, as I gave you that example yesterday. But other types of research, action research, or what I sometimes call academic or academic institutional research. I'll talk about that in about 10 minutes as well. And then when you decide on the type of research, what's your approach going to be? Qualitative, quantitative, mixed method. So when we talk about teacher research, what type of research do we mean? And what are teachers' conceptions of research? When you think of teachers and you think about research, what do teachers mean by research? There's a lot of work done by Simon Borg on this, different conceptions of research. Does it mean just reading an article in the library, or does it mean actively engaging in collecting a large amount of data and analyzing it and publishing it? Those are two different ideas about what research is. So, what do you do as a teacher researcher? And finally, what is your motivation for doing research or for doing reflective practice? Why do you do research as a teacher? Do you have contractual obligations? So where I work at my university, for example, I have to do research. I get paid to do research as part of my job. It's in my contract. Almost half my time is to do research. But in many institutions, you may be hired as a teacher, and research is not part of your contract. Some teachers do research just on their own accord because they want to do it, because they want to, develop as teachers for their own professional development. Sometimes you may be part of a community of practice, a research community of practice. One of my recent PhD students did a very nice study in China where a group of college English teachers got together in a department where they decided they were going to do research, and they were going to meet together in a forum once every 2 weeks, I think, and then share literature, talk about research methods. So they developed on their own accord a community of practice so that they could develop their research skills. Is your motivation to share research findings, to disseminate your research findings, to disseminate them, to share them, spread them around? Or are you doing it as part of a qualification, your undergrad degree? Are you doing a research project because it's required as part of your degree, or a master's or a PhD thesis? Is it part of the qualification? So what's your motivation? Just take a second to think about that. What's your motivation, right? Right. So Kenan Dikilitas, he did a webinar last year, which was really interesting, that I had a look at. It's on YouTube. And he talks about how teachers can transform their teaching through research, that by doing research, teachers change their teaching practices, right? He also said that teachers transform themselves through research. In other words, they change their identities as teachers through the process of doing research. So by doing research, by engaging in systematic reflective practice in those different forms, whichever way you choose, narrative inquiry is my preference, of course, exploratory practice, action research, by engaging in teacher research, he claimed in this webinar, and shows a lot of evidence for it, that teachers transform their teaching, but they also transform themselves. They transform teachers themselves. And this was supported in a very nice article recently published by Emily Edwards. I won't go through this whole slide, but she asked the question, in what ways do teachers develop or transform from conducting research, including narrative inquiry, right? And she had three main findings. Their general professional development, which included new teacher researcher identity. So through engaging in research, they changed their identities, their professional identities as teachers, particularly including an aspect of a researcher identity. They also renewed their enthusiasm for teaching and improved their self-efficacy beliefs. So these are very important findings by engaging in research. She also said that another way they transformed themselves was by different aspects of teaching related, which is what Dikelita said in the earlier slide. So developing their teaching practice and enhancing their confidence about teaching. And there were also broader benefits as well, such as collaboration and development of communities of practice. The example I gave you from my Chinese PhD student that I mentioned as well. So by engaging in research, there are these benefits, right? And what I'm going to be focusing on today is not only the teaching benefits, but also the changes to teachers' identity. And I thought I'd share with you just very briefly this longitudinal study, which was set in Bogota in Colombia. I'm not going to spend too much time on the whole study, but I just want to show you some aspects of it, where what I was interested in was focusing on a group of 7 new PhD students. These were very experienced English teachers. They were also teacher educators, but early career researchers. They didn't have much experience in research. So they all decided to do a PhD at this university in Bogota in South America. And I thought it would be interesting to investigate the negotiation of their language teacher and teacher educator identities in this PhD program, paying particular attention to their emotions and their researcher identities, because they had lots of experience as teachers and lots of experience as teacher educators, but they wanted to develop as researchers. They wanted to do research in order to develop their careers. And I was interested in how this learning about research would develop their identities as teachers and teacher educators, right? So the point I'm making here is we're looking at the connections between research and teacher identity. So I did 2 narrative interviews with each participant, and 4 months apart. And I say narrative interviews because I got them to tell me about their backgrounds, their language learning. I asked them to tell me stories about their teaching, their teacher education experiences, their teacher educator experiences, and so on. So there were a lot of stories in these 2 interviews. The first interview with all 7 of them was quite general and biographical. The second interview was based on some common themes from the first set of interviews. So that I took the themes back to them and did the second round of interviews and explored the themes further with them to get more stories told about their experiences, right? And then I analyzed the interviews based on short story analysis, which is a method of content analysis that I use, where I focus on, who is in the stories, where does the action of the stories take place, and when does the action take place. And I focused very much on different scales of context. I spoke about this briefly yesterday, where you focus not only what's happening on the micro aspects of the life, but try and interpret that in terms of the macro things going on in the world, in language education, in terms of, language policies in Colombia that they told me about in their stories, and more global ideas about, colonialism that they were interested in, many of them, and other stories about research and the place of research in teaching and teacher education. So the stories, the second interviews were quite focused. But what I want to do is just very quickly show you how they focused on research in these interviews. This was one interview with Anna. She was a very experienced teacher, as they all were. But here she's talking about research, a research-related experience. She says that she was applying for a job at a university. She desired to be a full-time academic at a university, to be a full-time teacher and researcher at a university. She says in line 1, well, they opened some posts. In other words, they advertised these positions, and I would apply for it. But then they said that I was not prepared. I mean, I was not prepared because I didn't have research. Now, interesting, right? So they advertised these posts. Look, the words I've got in red are the characters in the story. So they opened some posts, and I applied for these positions, but they said I was not prepared. Why was I not prepared? Because I didn't have research. So they said, you didn't have appropriate research. Line 5, because I didn't have this and that, because your only piece of research is the one that you did for your master's degree. So she had limited research, what she did for her master's degree. That's all she had. And I was like, oh, so I'm not enough? What I have done is not enough? And so I said, oh. So I was thinking, maybe I should study a PhD, because like having a master's will never be enough if I want to work in a full-time position in a university. So here we got a lovely story, right? She's in the interview, she told me this lovely story about the reason for why she decided to do a PhD, so that she can learn more about research and get more research experience. If she gets more research experience, then maybe she can fulfill her desire to get a full-time academic research job at a university. So this is what the story is about. But you can see in the story, there's a conflict set up between I, the narrator, and they, the people at the university. And the conflict is about the type of research and the amount of research that she has. She's got the wrong type of research. You got this and that and this and that. That's not what they want. You've only got one piece of research from your master's. That's not enough. So she says, I'm not enough. My identity is not enough. They don't see me as a qualified researcher to come and teach at a university. So it's an academic type of research they are wanting. This is a story about her teacher-researcher identity, right? So I was trying to make sense of all of this by looking at all of the stories. They all told me about their reasons for why they wanted to do a PhD. They all related somehow to research. Why did they want to do this continuing professional development? Why did they want to do this additional teacher education? Mostly it had to do with further research. They wanted to develop their research skills as teachers. So if you have a look at this diagram here, you see I've connected the reasons for doing a PhD or for this further study, this further professional development, with identity. The reasons and their identity are connected. And I like this idea of Bonnie Norton's idea of investment for, how you invest in some activity, language learning, in order to get something back, right? So their reasons for investing in further professional development is also investing in their identities. They want to become researchers that will enable them to become better teachers, better teacher educators, and also to get jobs. in the types of institutions they want to get. So, just looking at the story again, look at the green bit. She wants those posts, but she was not prepared. I didn't have research. You only had this and that. You only had this piece of research from your master's degree, but it's not enough. Therefore, her reason, study a PhD. In order to fulfill her desire, her goal, to work at a university. So the reason is connected to her identity that she is investing in, right? And it's got to do, I think, with development. I like this word development because she sees that she needs to develop as a researcher. So I put this arrow going through the diagram. Look, it's not that big a deal. I'll just put the arrow through the diagram because I think development moves forward. So I've got this arrow moving forward here through the diagram. This is her reasons for doing a PhD, because she's investing in her professional career. She's investing in her identity. In other words, there's a development. And the type of development, I think, is to develop in her research, sort of research-focused development, but it's also development in her personal life, to grow as a person. So, those two arrows going through, a research-focused development, personal-focused development. So I looked at all of the 7 participants, and they all had reasons for wanting to do a PhD. They're all related to identity, and they're all related to different types of development. So I'm not going to tell you all about their stories, but these are the 5 interconnected identity-related developments, all right? So the one we've just looked at with Anna is the personal focused development that includes personal growth, development of new skills and knowledge. So this personal focus, academic focus development relates to enhanced knowledge and competences that have to do with theoretical aspects of teacher education. So, you go to university, they're going back to PhD to learn some of the theory, some of the academic stuff that you do at university. Practice-focused development relates to practice as a teacher or as a teacher educator. So you want to study further, you want to develop because you want to practice better as a teacher, right? Research-focused development, we just saw with Anna, refers both to research competence, knowledge and skills about doing research, but also how to use that competence to fulfill professional goals. So a strategic research development here. To have research, new research competence in order to get a job. So there's a strategic aspect to research-focused development. And also student-teacher focused development, because they were all teacher educators. They wanted to do the PhD and do research in their areas of interest so that they can focus more productively on their student teachers when they go back to their teacher education. So these were the different types of development that I found. I think they all relate to research that these teachers wanted to do in their PhD program: personal, academic, practice, research focused, student teacher focused, right? It was a very interesting study. I could show you much, much more data, many, many stories. These all came through from the stories they told me in these narrative interviews. Important here is that we've got this connection between the reasons they decided to study the PhD, to do further continuing education, which were all planning. They had to do research as part of this. They wanted to research particular topics, so they were investing in this new research learning in order to invest in their identities. So they were developing in these 5 different ways. I just want to spend a little more time with Anna. Just a little bit more time with Anna. I want to tell you another story about Anna, and then to show you a research dilemma, a teacher-researcher dilemma, Okay. And then we can just pull that apart a little bit just to finish off. Then we can have some more questions. So remember, Anna is the one who wants to work at a university in an academic researcher role. And she couldn't get the job because they said she didn't have enough research. So now we're going to maybe find out what type of research she does have and what type of research she wants to do. So she says, but I would love to carry out research. But what I don't like is the system in which the research should be like this and like that. And you have to publish every year, every 2 years. I think is wild. It's like you have to produce a lot of research to show it's like I'm doing this research. Okay, so she's making a comment on the system in the universities where she wants to go and teach. The system, she's talking about the sort of neoliberal system where your research has to be counted. You have to do research of a particular type. It's got to be in this journal or that journal, and the journal has to be rated. And you have to follow certain standards that the university or the institution sets. She said she doesn't want to be involved in this type of system that measures everything and tells you what to do when you do research. In line 8, I say, so you should be doing that, yeah? And she says, yeah, like, no, I want to do research to impact the local community, to impact the teachers, not with the pressure of publishing and showing off, right? She says that the academics who do research, they're only doing it because they want to show off. Look, I've got 5 publications. I published in the top journal. It's all showing off, she said. It's pretending. She rather wants to do research that will impact the local community, will be good for her teachers, will be good for her student teachers. That's what she wants to do, right? She says in line 12, I mean, nobody problematizes that no one asks questions about this. Like, it's publishing for the sake of publishing. And I think this is what the system is doing, the system in institutions. Like, the system should get published. Sorry, I can't. Like, the system should get publications very frequently, a lot of publications. This is what they want. Otherwise, they are not like respected scholars. Is this okay? She asks. Is this what we should be doing? And sometimes I see their education like going around just publishing for having respect, and that scares me. So she says, we're just showing off when we publish all the time. Is that what we should be doing in our education system? She said, I find that very scary because I'm scared of doing a research for the sake of the publication, just to get it published, not because you want to improve a situation or because you want to understand a practice. So her ideas for research are very much, we should be doing it to improve our teaching, to improve our teacher education. It should be so that we understand our practice, so we can develop as practitioners, not because we want to show off with how many publications we got, because the university tells us how many publications, how frequently we should be publishing. That's part of the system. She's anti that. So anyway, I in a study, I analyzed this and some other parts of the interview, and I put it together into this diagram. Don't worry about reading this. I'm going to show you bits and pieces of this diagram now. But what I did in the diagram, I had on the left-hand side, the type of what I call academic institutional research, the type of research that she doesn't like doing, right? And on this side, the teacher research that she does like doing. And she's stuck in the middle. Who she is, her identity is stuck in the middle. She's in a dilemma. Her identity is in a dilemma, right? So there's this tension between the type of research she will be required to do and the type of research that she wants to do. And this is an identity dilemma for her. Let's just look at the left side of the diagram, this academic institutional research. So the characteristics of this, according to her story, are that it's part of this neoliberal system where there's high accountability. There's always someone measuring how much you do, where you have to maintain standards, right? You have to be accountable. You have a review every year, and you have to submit your review and see how many articles, how many conferences, and you have to measure it against the standards of that institutions. And what they do is when they analyze it, they look at the type of research, the frequency of the publications, the quantity, how many. Now, she finds this type of research meaningless. This is the word that she used. She said, from my perspective, this is meaningless research for me, okay? On the other hand, on the other side of this tension that causing this dilemma in her life is the teacher research. And the characteristics of this is research which is applicable to teacher education programs. It's applicable to teachers and student teachers and the local community. She used that word too, the local community, where the research has impact. Any research and any publications is done to understand practice and to improve the practice of me as a researcher, of my student teachers, and ultimately language learners. She wants it to have impact, to be meaningful. So the type of research she wants to do is the research that is meaningful, not meaningless research. So Anna is stuck. She's in the middle. Her dilemma here is an identity dilemma. As a researcher, her researcher identity is in a dilemma, right? And it's got to be because of the stage of her career, where she's wanting to go into a university. She wants to go become an academic researcher at a university. So this stage of the career is presenting her with this dilemma. She's got these past experiences that she values greatly. She's a very experienced teacher. She's a teacher educator. She's taught overseas. She's got great experience. She's even done lots of action research. She's supervised action research. But as you saw, it's not good enough. She has these desires to go into a university. She's got this imagined future, and she's got this very strong moral stance. She believes very strongly what's right and what's wrong as a teacher educator. All right, she's been pulled this way and she's been pulled that way, and she's suffering from this dilemma. Right. So in terms of sharing findings, she made this interesting comment where she wants to disseminate her findings to be meaningful to the people that will get value out of them. So this raises interesting questions. Should teachers disseminate their research findings? Not only, Anna, at a university, but think about your own situation. Should, if you do narrative inquiries, if you do other types of action research in schools, where are you situated as a teacher researcher? High school, primary school, should you disseminate? Should you be required to do that? Maybe it depends on your conceptions of teacher research. What do you see as research? What do you do as a researcher? Maybe dissemination is not part of what a teacher researcher should be doing. How should research findings be disseminated? Do you always have to write an academic article? I know as part of the series of webinars, there's a fantastic idea of contributing to this book on narrative inquiry, teachers' experiences. That sounds like a fantastic way of disseminating some of your ideas and some of your experiences. So there's one opportunity to disseminate some of your reflections and your experiences. And please contribute to that. But there are other ways too. You can do demonstration lessons based on the outcomes of action research. That's a way. You can do poster presentations at conferences. You can do other presentations, workshops. There are many ways of disseminating research. But again, looking back at question A, should teachers disseminate? Some may say, no, I'm happy doing my action research, my exploratory practice for my own purposes to improve my own practice. I don't need to disseminate research. So these questions are very much interrelated. And what your answers to these questions depend on? Well, your teaching context. Are you at university? What are your employment conditions? Are you teaching high school or primary school where no research obligations exist? What are your personal goals? Some people may have no ambition whatsoever to do research, and that's fine. Other people may be interested in research and want to engage in research and may want to do it for professional gains to improve their teaching. Others may not be interested at all, and that's fine. To develop knowledge and skills, what about time? Do you have time? Are you given time by institutions? So sharing research findings, is a very complicated question. And I've just put one slide because we could do an entire webinar on ways to share findings as a researcher. I just thought I'd show you this recent book I wrote with a colleague, just to end off and just take 5 minutes. It's called Communicating Identities. And in this book, there are a lot of activities, 48 activities, where the teacher uses these activities with the language learners, where the learners do a communicative language teaching activities that relate to the topic of identity. So there are 4 different facets of identity: reflexing identities, projecting, recognizing identities, and imagining identities, which are described in the book. And each type of identity has 12 activities. All the activities are described in detail, how to do them, materials are provided, and so on. So it's a book that focuses on bringing discussions and exploration and questioning identity into the classroom at any level. That can be all levels of language teaching. But what I wanted to show you is that at the end of every activity, there's a teacher reflection. So the teachers reflect on the same topic that the learners have been doing the activity on. So interestingly is that for each teacher reflection, there's an opportunity to think about a research topic. So this is why I'm showing it to you today, because here is one. This is the very first activity in the book. The activity for the learners, and it's very elementary, it's a basic stage. The activities are they're suggested levels: elementary, intermediate, and advanced. This is a very, very elementary one. For the learners, what they do is they look at some course materials. It could be a course book, exercise book, online material, and they identify some pictures or some diagrams or even some colors or anything basic, and then they ask some questions about how does this represent who I am? Why is this like me, or why is this not like me? And then in pairs, they try and guess each other's why it's like you, why it's not like you. Very basic activity. But then the teacher reflection at the end of the activity is like this. Next time you flip through the materials and documents you come across in your professional life, think about how the images, keywords, and diagrams reflect how you see yourself as a teacher, administrator, or researcher. Such materials may include your course books, syllabus documents, policy statements, institutional websites, institutional Facebook pages, school newsletters, notices, and memos, student work. And I'm sure we actually do this, in real life. When we read through all these documents as a teacher, right? We see documents all the time. Things come on our mobile phones. We get emails. We have course books. We have worksheets. Often we come across something and we think, how does this relate to me? Do I agree with this? Is this like what I would do, not do? How does it relate to me? So this is a reflection for the teacher at the end of the one of 48 activities. But important here is there a research topic here? Is there something that could spark a and narrative inquiry. All of these topics, I think, could bring ideas for narrative inquiry. Is there a research topic here that you could do with your students, or that maybe could be a master's dissertation or undergraduate dissertation? Now, there are 48 teacher reflections in the book. So that for each of them, there's a teacher reflection about identity, but it may also spark in your head a research topic. I'll just show you one more. This was much later on. This was this was one about difficult discussions in the classroom. And then this is the teacher reflection. Answer yes or no to the first question. Am I an immigrant? Yes or no. So this was about immigration and identity, right? Then consider the following statements and note your personal reaction. How does your reaction relate to your relationships with your students, your relationships with your teacher colleagues, and your classroom practice? So, am I immigrant? Yes or no? A, immigration and race are very much interconnected. Immigrants' religious practices can be problematic in some host communities in my town or city. Immigrants bring opportunities for learning about new cultural experiences to all in our school. Private schools for immigrants to practice their religions and cultures are acceptable. All immigrants should learn the dominant language of the host country. So some controversial statements there, but that's the whole point, because it gets you as a teacher to reflect on them. But the point I'm trying to make is there a research topic here? Is there something that is researchable either for you in terms of more systematic reflective practice, or some action research or exploratory practice, or maybe more rigorous in terms of a dissertation or a thesis? Right. Okay. I think I'll stop there because.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And we can have questions for the last 15 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for the explanation. That's make it very clear that maybe we as the teachers, it is better to have receipts. Yeah. And the proof, it's myself, Prof. Gary. Yeah. I was 17 years as the teacher, and then I did my own research, and then having such kind of reflection, and this is what I'm now. Okay, so we go to the questions. I think that it's better to listen some voices from the participants. Yeah, I see
very good.
from Lita Taupat. Yeah, Lita from University from Nusa Tenggara Timur. Lita, Mbak Lita, are you ready for having? Yes, you may ask questions directly to Prof. Gary.
Yes, thank you very much, Bu Arifa. Hello, Prof. I hope you still remember me.
How are you? How are you?
I'm good, Professor.
Very good to see you.
Yeah, it's very good to see you too, Prof. Yes. Actually, you already answered my question about self-reflection, because recently I did a presentation related to self-reflection about teacher identity, and I get comment from my professor that this is too subjective thing to as a research article. So that's what I asked for you, if I can use my personal experiences as the source of data. But you already answered before, but actually I already read your book about teacher identity, and I draw my work on your definition about teacher identity. So
Okay.
that's really interesting for me. And I also plan to do my dissertation about the teacher identity based on your work. Prof.
Very good.
Actually,
Very nice.
yes,
That's good.
yeah.
If you do that, if you want to write an article, I mean, just think carefully about what journal you want to send it to, because some smaller journals and regional journals may be interested in autobiographies, and particularly if you can relate it to some issues in the region, some issues that are going on locally, then it has relevance to those particular local conditions. So if you can relate your autobiography to those local conditions, then there's more chance of being published. It'll be much harder to publish it in an international journal unless you can relate it to these big issues and ask big questions. So, have a look around at local journals, and there may be, new curriculum initiatives, or there may be new policy decisions. I'm not sure what your biography is all about, but maybe you can try and relate it to that, relate it to the practice of maybe you try to implement something, and then that, then there's a good chance of it being published.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you, Prof.
Okay, good luck.
Thank
Good
you.
luck. Nice to see you again.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Prof.
So I think that I can give stories based on my experience in guiding my students. Mbak Lita is one of the students that doing the research with narrative inquiry when she gets the master degree. Then she continues her research in dissertation with narrative inquiry. So this is a very interesting to know that our students are doing narrative inquiry and then continue to have a research. Yeah.
Very good. Very happy.
Yeah. I'm a happy teacher. Yeah. Okay. Next to the next questions. So the questions is Ali from Unsika. Pak Ali, are you here? Pak Ali? Yeah. If not, we go to the next one. Pak Ali from Unsika asked the question like this. Prof. Gary, what are the philosophical roots underpinning narrative inquiry research?
The philosophical. Yeah, on day one, look, philosophy is not my strong point, right? So, but on day one, I spoke about epistemology. And I mentioned that epistemology is about knowing, ways of knowing, how we know things. It's about knowledge and about knowing. And there are different perspectives on how we know about the world, right? But what I'm familiar with is the work of Jerome Bruner. And he's got these two perspectives that he's written about. He's a psychologist, and he wrote about these two perspectives. And one of them is narrative ways of knowing. And narrative ways of knowing means putting things together into story by combining things, looking at the detail of our lives. When we live our lives, we put things together, we combine, we look for detail, we make sense of it by, relating people and actions, our view of the world. That's one thing we do. But he said what we also do is what he called a paradigmatic way of making sense of the world. This is very much like if you think of thematic analysis. This paradigmatic way of making sense of the world is by categorizing things. So, we do it all the time in our lives. So we say there are these things called animals. And with animals, there are different types. You get dogs, you get sheep, you get snakes, you get lions. But with dogs, you get different types of dogs too. With snakes, you get different types of snakes. With monkeys, you get different types of monkeys. And so we can categorize with furniture. we can get a table, we can get a chair. But if you think of a chair, there are different types of chairs. And so we can categorize, we make sense of the world by categorizing things, just like you do with the thematic analysis. It's the same sort of thing. So there are these two ways of making sense of the world. And so sort of philosophically, I guess, when it comes to narrative inquiry, there's a belief, I guess, that we do make sense of the world through story, through narrative. And if you do narrative inquiry, you would believe that, you would follow that epistemology, you would have an epistemological orientation that supports narrative as a way of making sense of the world. I certainly do. I mean, I strongly believe that through story, people understand the world, right? This is a philosophical argument. So that when I interview people and I engage with them, sometimes, I mean, the longest interview I've done took a whole afternoon. This was one I did a couple of years ago. And I spent 2-3 hours with this person. And I had the recorder going, and we had tea, we had lunch all the time with the interview going. And we engaged, and there were stories. I had a set of topics I wanted to cover, and I covered them all. It took 3 hours. And we engaged in this talking and this conversations, and it was all a sort of interview, I suppose. But we were understanding, it was all about her. She was the narrator, but we were understanding her life experiences based on my research topic. And I firmly believe that we were making sense of this topic through these conversations and through the stories that she was sharing. So I believe that, the epistemology, that's the sort of philosophy. But in analyzing some of that data, I did analyze it paradigmatically. Thematically, I started, pulling it apart a little bit to look for themes. And I think we also do that in real life. And that's what Bruno was saying. So there's different sort of philosophies. I think it's a belief in story. It's all about story. It's a philosophy of story and the power of story and the centrality of story. And important here is that these philosophical ideas transfer to methodology. So then it becomes a research methodology. And then the way we go about doing our research is informed by these philosophical ideas. So the type of research we do is narrative, it's qualitative. I mean, if you have a narrative epistemology, you can't go do statistics because that's dehumanizing the humans. But with narrative, you are embracing the human life experiences, okay?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Prof. Gary. Yeah, I think that first of all that we can do, before believe it, we have to do that. we have to do that.
Yeah.
We have to do the narrative inquiry research, both for our own research and also with our students.
Yeah.
And our college, maybe. Yeah, okay. Then the next one, the questions from Ibu Rifki from Universitas Ahmad Dahlan. You may ask questions directly to Professor Gary.
Okay.
The committee, would you please to unmute Ibu Rifki? Ibu Rifki? Yeah, okay.
Okay. Hello, good afternoon from Indonesia. How are you, Professor Gary? It's been
very good,
pleasure.
Thank you. How are you?
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Well, I'm following your work because I'm doing my dissertation right now related to the teacher's identity. And of course, I quoted and also cite a lot of your work, and I'm honored today. So I have a question about some points that when I already did extracting data of stories from the participant, but the way how I analyze them, can I use qualitative content analysis to analyze all the stories that I extracted or got from the participants, obtained from the participants. And then would you please explain more or explicate more about how could I do that, just in case to get the very robust findings and also put them into a discussion and also the result. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's a big question. So I don't know if you were yesterday in the webinar, but I strongly suggest you have a look at yesterday's webinar, because I gave a long example of some research I did with 2 students in an intensive course I taught. And I gave very good example of an answer to your question, where we had narratives where we categorized, had sub-themes, and had excerpts of data from their narratives that illustrated those themes. So there is a recording, right, of day 2.
Yes.
So have a look at the recording of day 2, and you can have a look at that example. But it depends, again, what more you're going to do. So that's a straightforward thematic analysis. But in your question, I have a question. Where's the story, right? So you say you're analyzing the stories from the data. Are they stories, or is it from the interviews? Are they actual stories, or is it just, qualitative data?
Oh, it's the combination between the observation and also the interviews.
So did you write stories based on the observation and the interviews?
And also getting the real stories from the participants as well, including their artifacts, because all of my participants, they did an action research, and I tried to find out about their engagement with their research, and then how those research or how their research impact their own life, especially to improve their practice in the class.
Well, that sounds like a fabulous study. I mean, it's very much potential, lots of potential for good narrative inquiry there. I think you need just to keep checking, keep asking yourself where the stories are, right? So are you writing stories? Are the stories that you're analyzing extracting from the data, or are you constructing stories and then analyzing the stories? So just keep asking yourself that question. Okay. Because you may just simply be doing qualitative research and not narrative inquiry. So I think you need just to look at some definitions of narrative and just reassure yourself every now and then that what you're doing is narrative. But it sounds like you are. I'm not questioning you. It sounds like you are doing narrative, very much so. But I think you just need to emphasize what and define what you mean by story, and then use that definition throughout your study. I think it's important to say what you mean by story or what you mean by narrative, and then use that consistently, right? But yes, so just have a look at the webinar yesterday where we had this narrative data, which were definitely narratives. These were written narratives by these students. And then we took out excerpts, which were actually little stories themselves that represented particular themes. And then we joined a number of these themes into categories, which were tensions. And we had a number of these tensions, which we then put together into a diagram. So it was a very simple example I gave. But it's a straightforward thematic analysis. It's just important that it's that the evidence you give, the extract of from the data, that it clearly shows the theme. It clearly illustrates the theme, and then the themes you connect together into a category. And then we had about, how many was it? I can't remember, 6 or 7 categories, which then could be your findings chapter, and you discuss those categories as the main findings. Now that's like a paradigmatic approach. That's where you sort of breaking it down into themes. The last 2 days, I've also spoken about how you can construct stories, right? So you write stories based on the data that you've collected. Now, I don't know how many participants do you have?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it needs more discussion.
Okay, yeah,
Prof.
yeah,
Gary.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Then, because of the time, it's so limited for this 3 days. It's more time for discussions about narrative inquiry, and hopefully, this is not the final discussions and the end of the day of the discussions of the narrative inquiry. But more time in the future, we can discuss more about narrative inquiry, and if possible, we can make such kind of a conference or symposiums with narrative inquiry. So
that would be
hopefully,
great.
yeah, hopefully that we can invite Professor Gary Berguizen again to Solo, and we invite you all to come to Solo again. Okay, Prof. Gary. For final speech for the 3 days, would you please to give a short a remark for this 3 days event?
Okay, right. Well, firstly, I want to thank you all for participating. I want to thank you for inviting me to Arifa and the university for inviting me. It's an absolute privilege to be a participant in this work. I've been engaged for a number of years with the university, and I've been enjoying it so much. I think I can see so much development. I can see a lot of interest. I can see a lot of energy. And I think although the webinars have finished today, I think I can see that, I can see some outcomes already of narrative inquiry, but I think it's going to be long lasting. I can see more and more work in narrative inquiry. And although we've been talking about narrative inquiry, I think it's the energy of doing research that is also very, very important. In teacher education, I think we need to be doing research from as early as possible to not only do research, but to learn about what research is. So to develop a vocabulary of research very early on, even if we don't all become researchers, but if we become teachers, we need to be questioning, we need to be reflecting. And of course, I always believe that the best way to reflect and to research is through story. And that's what I've been talking about over the past 3 days. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly have enjoyed engaging with you, and I wish you all the very, very best. I hope you contribute to the book that will be coming out. And when it does, I look forward to reading it. That's for sure. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Gary, and also for all the participants. And we also invite for all the participants to join with the book chapter. And hopefully that this is not only just talk, but also we do actions in doing the research and also have a reflection with narrative inquiry. So we invite you to participate in a book chapter, and we will meet again with Professor Gary Berguizen for further discussions. Thank you very much, Prof. Gary. Stay healthy, and also for all the participants, thank you very much. Stay healthy too, and stay happy. Okay, thank you very much for today. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Nur Arifah Derajati, for leading the webinar. And also thank you so much, Professor Gary, for the amazing session. It was really insightful. Hopefully we could have another discussion in other great opportunity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are now come to the end of the session. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to appreciate all the amazing session we have done after having 3 days webinar, and to the amazing speaker as well. Also, all participants who have been really enthusiastic to participate in these 3-day sessions. Thank you so much. Hopefully this will lead us to be more and more curious about narrative inquiry and bring us to productive research and better education in the near future. And to be noted, I would like to remind you again and again regarding to book chapter held by Universitas 11 Maret that we still open for submitting abstract for book chapter. So make sure you prepare the abstract and send to our email nibookchapter@gmail.com before 17th May 2022. So just prepare and send to our email. Last but not least, I would like to remind for all the participants to kindly fill the attendance form provided in the chat box by the committee, or you can just scan the barcode on your screen. And we would like to close the access at 12 p.m. Thank you so much and have a nice day. See you in another great learning time. Now you may leave the room. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mbak Mutia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Tiffany, Mas Erik, Mas Silvi, Mbak Rizky. Thank you very much for your hard work.
Awali hari dengan langkah pasti, bersiap menyambut dunia, raih cita-cita. Walaupun banyak hal yang tak pasti, usia tak jadi penghalang untuk raih prestasi. Bukan berlalu, tapi ku terus jalani. Salah hidup ini siap ku hadapi. Inilah saatnya untuk bulatkan tekad. Bersama kita bisa membangun negara. Selamat bertambah usia, UNS tercinta, kebanggaan nusa dan bangsa. Walau kegagalan menghadang, ku tahu kita bisa menjadi kebanggaan untuk negara. Waktu kan berlalu, tapi ku terus jalani. Masalah hidup ini siap ku hadapi. Inilah saatnya untuk bulatkan tekad. Bersama kita bisa membangun negara. Selamat bertambah usia,
Thank you, Bapak Ibu, for joining today's session. See you on the next opportunity.
Thank you, Mas Erik.
Give Rifa.